Nobody ever asked them, do you regret having lied to Oprah Winfrey? Do you regret having lied on Netflix and all the magazine interviews? Don't you see?
For years, Meghan believed the most dangerous chapters of her royal life were protected by silence, private agreements, and competing palace loyalties. But when Tom Bower hinted that he possessed one detail no one expected him to reveal, panic reportedly spread before the public even knew why. This was not being presented as another familiar accusation dragged back into the spotlight. Bower's warning appeared sharper, more deliberate, and far more personal. He suggested that somewhere beneath the public interviews, angry denials, and carefully defended versions of the royal departure, there was one private moment Meghan believed had been buried permanently. Her first response was not outrage. It was silence. There was no immediate statement, no public counterattack, and no attempt to dismiss the claim as palace gossip. That restraint only deepened the mystery. Meghan had faced damaging allegations before and had often answered them by challenging sources, questioning motives, or reframing events through her own emotional experience. She understood how to fight a public battle, but this time she appeared to be waiting. And waiting created suspicion. Behind closed doors, the concern was allegedly not about what Bower might say in general, but what he might prove Meghan had already known. His claim pointed toward a warning delivered before one of the most important decisions of her life with Harry. A warning about what would happen if they rejected the monarchy's final attempt at compromise. For Meghan, the danger was obvious. The public had never witnessed those conversations. They had seen the consequences, the anger, and the bitter separation, but not the private choices that came before them. That gap had always offered protection. Harry, however, reportedly became increasingly uneasy. He wanted to defend his wife, yet Bower's words threatened to reopen arguments they had spent years trying to escape. Old questions returned. What had Meghan been told? What had she accepted? And had Harry understood the warning in exactly the same way? Inside the monarchy, caution took over. No official denial appeared. No senior royals stepped forward. Instead, quiet messages allegedly moved between households as advisors tried to determine how much Bower knew and whether his disclosure could affect the King, William, or even the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. Because the hidden warning was said to connect everything: Meghan's ambition, Harry's loyalty, financial independence, royal protocol, and a private assurance allegedly made to the late Queen. Then, Bower sharpened the threat. Meghan's greatest mistake, he suggested, was not something she later said in public. It was what she allegedly refused to accept when someone inside the monarchy offered her one final chance. And to understand why that forgotten warning could cause such fear, the story must return to the moment Meghan first realized that royal freedom always came with conditions. Behind the polished appearances and carefully staged smiles, Meghan was allegedly presented with an offer designed to protect her future inside the monarchy. It appeared generous, even compassionate, but hidden inside it was a condition that would later become the source of resentment, suspicion, and a devastating private choice. By then, the tension inside the palace had become impossible to ignore. Publicly, Meghan and Harry continued attending engagements with practiced confidence, standing beside senior royals as though the institution remained united. Privately, however, frustration was growing. Meghan allegedly felt trapped by rules she had never fully accepted, while palace officials feared that every disagreement was pushing the couple closer to a permanent break. Senior courtiers reportedly understood that forcing Meghan into the traditional royal mold would only deepen the conflict. So a compromise was quietly discussed. It was designed to give her breathing room without cutting her away from the monarchy completely. The proposal allegedly offered fewer ceremonial duties, more control over her schedule, and limited permission to pursue carefully approved commercial work. Royal protection could continue. Meghan and Harry would remain visible members of the family, appearing at selected occasions while stepping back from the most demanding parts of public service. On the surface, it looked like freedom. But the freedom came with a boundary the palace considered essential. Meghan and Harry could not use their royal status, private family knowledge, or access to palace life as leverage in future media deals, business ventures, or public negotiations. They could build an independent future, but they could not sell the authority of the crown alongside it. To palace advisors, the condition protected the monarchy. To Meghan, it allegedly felt like another form of control. She believed the institution wanted to keep the value of her popularity while restricting her ability to speak, earn, and defend herself. Accepting the arrangement might preserve her position, but it could also leave her permanently dependent on officials she felt had already failed to protect her from criticism. Harry reportedly saw the offer differently. He understood its limits, yet believed it might provide a path between duty and independence. It was not perfect, but it could prevent a devastating family rupture. Meghan feared the opposite. To her, compromise meant remaining tied to a system that could change the rules whenever its reputation was threatened. Then came the private warning. A senior royal figure allegedly told them that rejecting the proposal would have lasting consequences, reduced access, weakened influence, financial uncertainty, and a level of distrust that might never be repaired. Once they walked away, returning on their own terms might become impossible. Yet Meghan appeared confident. During those tense discussions, she allegedly made a clear promise about how royal connections and private information would be handled in the future. It was an assurance, powerful enough to calm the room, but one she believed would remain trapped behind palace walls. But the offer itself was not the secret Tom Bower was preparing to expose. The real danger lay in Meghan's alleged response and the promise that followed. The meeting was never meant to become part of the public story. According to the emerging account, Meghan made a private assurance so decisive that senior royals believed the crisis had been contained. Yet behind that promise, another plan may already have been forming, and someone inside the room remembered every word. Meghan and Harry entered the discussion carrying very different emotions. Meghan allegedly felt cornered, convinced that palace officials had misunderstood her ambitions and ignored the pressure she had endured. Harry appeared protective, ready to challenge anyone who suggested that his wife was responsible for the growing crisis. Across from them sat senior advisors and at least one influential royal representative, all aware that a private family conflict was dangerously close to becoming an international scandal. The palace wanted certainty, not affection, not another temporary promise to cooperate. It wanted an assurance that the most sensitive parts of royal life would remain protected if Meghan and Harry eventually stepped away. That was when Meghan allegedly gave the answer the room had been waiting for. She reportedly insisted that she had no intention of commercially exploiting private family relationships, confidential conversations, or the disputes unfolding behind palace doors. Royal pain, she suggested, would not become a product. Personal disagreements would not be transformed into material for interviews, books, documentaries, or lucrative media projects. The assurance mattered because the monarchy feared something far greater than departure. Harry and Meghan leaving would be painful, but survivable. What terrified senior figures was the possibility that private protocol, emotional wounds, and deeply personal family exchanges could be carried into the global marketplace. Those present reportedly accepted Meghan's words, but not without caution. Trust had already been weakened. Senior officials allegedly requested that a record of the conversation be preserved in case the meaning of the agreement was later disputed. It may not have been a signed contract. Instead, sources suggested there was a written summary, an internal memorandum, or a contemporaneous account prepared shortly afterward. It recorded what had been discussed, what the palace had warned, and what Meghan was believed to have accepted. Meghan allegedly assumed the conversation remained protected by royal discretion. Palace meetings were not supposed to become public weapons. She may have believed that even if tensions worsened, the institution would never expose its own private negotiations. Harry may not have understood how carefully every assurance had been documented. That possibility would later become crucial, because he could defend their version of events without knowing what remained stored inside palace files. And within that hidden record was reportedly one sentence capable of challenging the story presented after their departure. A sentence suggesting Meghan had understood the consequences before the final break occurred. Then, Tom Bower revealed the sentence Meghan allegedly believed would remain sealed forever, and the entire story changed in an instant. Tom Bower's revelation was not merely another allegation about palace tension. He claimed Meghan had been explicitly warned that leaving under disputed terms would close the door to a future half-royal, half-commercial arrangement, and that she privately acknowledged the consequence before later presenting the outcome as something imposed upon her. According to Bower's account, the warning could not have been clearer. Before the final separation, Meghan allegedly knew that rejecting the palace compromise would carry a permanent cost. She and Harry could seek independence, build private careers, and step away from daily royal duties. But they could not continue representing the crown while using their royal position to strengthen commercial ventures. Then came the detail Meghan never expected to surface. She allegedly responded that she understood the condition. More than that, she was said to have accepted that proceeding might leave them with no route back. It was a brief acknowledgement, but its meaning was devastating. If true, it suggested Meghan had not been blindsided by the consequences. She had been warned, had understood the danger, and had moved forward anyway. That claim collided directly with the emotional story later presented to the public. Harry and Meghan appeared shocked by restrictions surrounding royal branding, official representation, financial support, and security. Their frustration suggested that the palace had suddenly imposed harsh limits after they announced their plans. Bower's allegation offered a darker interpretation. The limits may not have been unexpected at all. His claimed source was reportedly someone familiar with the private negotiation record, an individual who knew about notes or an internal summary created shortly after the crucial meeting. That possibility transformed the situation. Meghan's fear was no longer limited to embarrassment. If one sentence had been preserved, what else remained? There could be records showing who advised her, what assurances she gave, what she told Harry, and whether future media ambitions had already entered the discussion. One disclosure could lead to another, and the palace's silence made the threat feel even greater. Knowing a consequence, however, is not the same as believing it will truly happen. Meghan may have understood the warning while privately assuming the monarchy would eventually retreat. International attention, public sympathy, and Harry's position within the family might force the palace to negotiate again. Harry was left in an agonizing position. If he had not understood the full meaning of Meghan's acknowledgement, he now had reason to wonder whether he had been given the complete picture. The palace neither confirmed nor directly denied Bower's account. That silence allowed suspicion to grow. Meghan was no longer framed simply as someone punished by an unforgiving institution, but as someone who may have taken a calculated gamble and later challenged the cost when the gamble failed. And Bower was not finished. He hinted that the warning was only the beginning, and that he may also know why Meghan believed the palace would eventually surrender. The revelation answered what Meghan never expected to become public, but it also opened a more dangerous question: who convinced her that the monarchy would ultimately give in? Meghan's alleged confidence did not come from ignorance. It came from a calculation. The palace feared scandal, feared accusations, feared international backlash, and feared losing Harry completely. If those fears were powerful enough, Meghan may have believed the monarchy would eventually reopen every door it had threatened to close. Rejecting the palace compromise was therefore not necessarily viewed as a final departure. It may have been seen as the opening move in a longer battle. Meghan allegedly believed that once the immediate shock settled, renewed negotiations would begin, and the royal privileges withdrawn in anger might slowly be restored under public pressure. Her influence appeared to offer powerful leverage. She had global recognition, intense media interest, and symbolic importance far beyond traditional royal circles. Advisors may have argued that the monarchy could not permanently distance itself from her without facing accusations of cruelty, exclusion, and institutional prejudice. The risk was especially serious because Meghan was the first mixed-race woman to join the modern royal family. Any action against her could be examined through a much wider social and political lens. What the palace considered enforcement of royal rules might be presented publicly as punishment. And then there was Harry. His bond with Queen Elizabeth, his complicated loyalty to Charles, and his wounded relationship with William created another source of pressure. Meghan may have believed that emotional ties would eventually overpower protocol. The family could refuse them institutionally. But could it truly abandon Harry personally? That belief reportedly shaped what followed. Interviews, statements, documentaries, and media projects may have served more than one purpose. They allowed Meghan and Harry to tell their version of events, but they also increased pressure on the monarchy by making private pain part of a global conversation. Inside the palace, however, those actions were allegedly interpreted as a betrayal. Officials believed the couple had promised not to turn confidential royal conflict into commercial material. Each new disclosure, therefore, appeared to confirm their worst fears and made compromise less likely. Money deepened the divide. Meghan and Harry may have expected personal family assistance, private financial support, or continued security protection even after official duties ended. Harry reportedly struggled to understand why leaving public service had to weaken private family support. The palace drew a colder distinction. Love, contact, and family connection belonged to the personal world. Titles, funding, protection, and representation belonged to the institution. Harry found that separation painful. Meghan allegedly viewed it as deliberate punishment designed to force them into submission. Bauer's revelation threatened to transform the entire departure story. What had been presented as a desperate escape from an unbearable system could instead appear to be a calculated power play built on the belief that the monarchy would eventually surrender. But that strategy depended on Meghan and Harry sharing the same understanding. As old warnings returned and private promises came under scrutiny, a darker question began forming between them. Had they truly entered the battle with the same information? But once the strategy began to unravel, the pressure shifted inward, and the most painful confrontation was no longer between Meghan and the palace, but between Meghan and Harry. Harry had defended Meghan through every accusation, every interview, and every fracture with his family. But Bauer's account allegedly introduced a devastating possibility. Meghan may have understood the final consequences before Harry fully did. For the first time, loyalty collided with the fear that part of the truth had been withheld. Harry reportedly began reconstructing the final months of negotiations in his mind. He returned to private conversations, urgent calls, and warnings delivered in language that had seemed deliberately unclear. Now, he was comparing those memories with Bauer's claims and the possibility that palace records preserved a far more definite version of what had been said. The difference was painful. Harry believed they had escaped an impossible situation together. He had seen their departure as an act of survival, not a calculated confrontation whose consequences had already been explained and accepted. If Meghan understood more than he did, then the foundation of their united story suddenly looked less secure. Meghan allegedly rejected any suggestion that she had deceived him. She argued that the palace's warnings were threatening but vague, designed to frighten them into remaining obedient. In her view, officials had spoken in absolutes, while still leaving enough uncertainty to deny responsibility later. There was also another possibility. Harry may have heard the same warning and simply understood it differently. He knew the institution could remove privileges, but he believed family love would eventually soften those decisions. He could not imagine Queen Elizabeth permanently closing the door, Charles refusing private support, or William allowing protocol to destroy what remained between them. That was where the conflict deepened. Meghan remained focused on what the palace had done. Harry became consumed by what she had known, and when she had known it. Old wounds quickly returned. His anger toward William, Charles's emotional distance, the loss of military roles that had defined part of his identity, the security battles, the humiliating feeling that the monarchy could replace him publicly while expecting him to carry the pain quietly. Meghan allegedly feared that Bower's claim might push Harry toward private contact with his family. If he sought answers without her, she could no longer shape the terms of the conversation or challenge every palace interpretation as it emerged. Inside royal circles, no pressure was needed. Advisors simply waited. They understood that direct attacks on Meghan might strengthen the Sussexes' unity, while silence allowed doubt to grow between them. Then a confidential message allegedly reached Harry. It offered clarification about the original negotiations and access to an account of what had been agreed, but only if he discussed it privately and kept Meghan's advisors outside the process. Harry now faced an impossible choice: reject the palace's version immediately, or hear evidence that could permanently change his understanding of why they left and what Meghan had accepted before they did. Harry's decision would determine whether the revelation remained a media controversy or became the first crack in the united front Meghan had fought so hard to preserve. The monarchy did not issue an angry denial, release documents, or publicly challenge Meghan. Instead, it did something far more unsettling. Nothing. That silence allowed Bower's claims to spread, while suggesting the palace held evidence it had chosen not to reveal and could change its mind at any moment. The strategy was cold, disciplined, and unmistakably royal. Any detailed response could force the palace to explain what had happened during private negotiations, reopen old family wounds, or confirm that confidential records existed. By refusing to engage, officials avoided those dangers while allowing Bower's allegation to grow without resistance. The pressure now fell entirely on Meghan. Every hour without a clear rebuttal made the story appear more believable to skeptical audiences. Yet responding carried risks of its own. Her advisors reportedly considered legal warnings, a carefully controlled denial, another emotional interview, and complete silence. None offered safety. A legal challenge could force Bower to reveal more about his source or the documents behind his claim. A formal denial might be examined word by word for loopholes. An interview could produce fresh contradictions, especially if Harry remembered the negotiations differently. Remaining silent, however, could be interpreted as confirmation. Inside the monarchy, Charles allegedly chose stability over confrontation. He had no desire to attack his son publicly, but he was equally unwilling to weaken the institution to protect Harry from the consequences of past decisions. William's position was believed to be firmer. Future Sussex involvement, in his view, required strict limits, private trust, and no uncertainty about who represented the crown. Catherine's influence was quieter but significant. She reportedly feared that another public war would damage the monarchy's image while pushing Harry deeper into isolation. Yet protecting him could not mean reopening every door without conditions. Compassion and caution had become impossible to separate. Meanwhile, senior courtiers allegedly began reviewing old correspondence, meeting summaries, and internal notes. They needed to know what could be released if Meghan accused the palace of inventing the warning. The monarchy had learned to preserve its memory. Conversations were recorded, letters were stored, agreements were summarized. And unlike public outrage, royal archives did not disappear when attention moved elsewhere. That was the palace's true advantage. It could wait. Bower then hinted that he might identify who documented the conversation and explain why the source had finally chosen to speak. The suggestion carried a silent threat. The sentence already revealed might not be the most damaging detail. Meghan reportedly began to understand that the palace did not need to destroy her credibility directly. It only needed to remain silent while uncertainty spread, until every interview, every accusation, and every previous version of events was examined again. As the silence tightened around her, Meghan faced one final decision: attack the allegation, retreat from it, or reveal a secret of her own powerful enough to change the balance. With Harry questioning the past, the palace refusing to speak, and Tom Bower hinting at further evidence, Meghan reaches the most dangerous moment of the crisis. Her next move could protect her public image or confirm that the private warning she once dismissed has finally become an irreversible royal sentence. A forceful response remained possible. Meghan could argue that the warning was never a fair choice, but a form of pressure delivered when she and Harry were already emotionally exhausted. She could admit that she understood the words without accepting the justice behind them. Knowing the consequences, she might insist, did not mean those consequences were proportionate, honest, or applied without revenge. That argument could protect her story. It could also ignite another royal war. Harry reportedly urged caution. He understood the temptation to strike back, but another public confrontation might destroy whatever remained of his relationship with Charles and William. Every new accusation narrowed the path home. Every interview turned private grief into another permanent record. For Meghan, however, the crisis was about more than returning to royal life. It was about control of her reputation, her future, and the meaning of everything she had sacrificed after leaving Britain. If Bower's version became dominant, her journey could be rewritten. What she had presented as a courageous escape from an unbearable institution might instead be remembered as a calculated gamble that failed. Then came the threat of a follow-up disclosure. Bower allegedly began preparing another revelation involving the advisor who had encouraged Meghan to believe the palace would eventually reconsider. If that person existed, the next disclosure could expose not only what Meghan knew, but why she felt confident enough to reject the final compromise. The monarchy responded by tightening its boundaries. Titles became more carefully controlled. Invitations carried greater sensitivity. Private contact, family occasions, official appearances, and access to future royal events were treated as privileges requiring trust rather than automatic rights. Harry now faced a painful truth. Reconciliation might demand more than an apology from his family. It could require him to acknowledge that some decisions he had defended were based on assumptions that proved disastrously wrong. Meghan continued to project confidence, but privately the choices were narrowing. She could release evidence of her own, challenge Bower through legal channels, or remain silent and risk allowing suspicion to harden into accepted truth. Each path carried danger. Each could unlock further secrets. And so the warning she allegedly believed she could outmaneuver became something far more powerful, evidence that the palace had explained the cost before she acted. The door had not closed without warning. According to Bower's account, Meghan had watched it begin to close and gambled that the monarchy would stop it before the final lock turned. Now, with Harry divided and the palace unmoved, that gamble threatened to become the decision that closed the royal door forever.